I definitely know how lost a human being can be in life. From 1977 to 1990, I hadn't spent no longer than 8 months in society. I was in and out of homes, children's institutions. I was in and out of prisons after the children's institutions. I was highly drug addicted to heroin and anything else that I could get my hands on, pills, pot, alcohol, you name it. I was addicted to everything that was called a drug. I love drugs. But in 1989, I had an experience that changed me forever, and I have never been the same since. From being that person that was absolutely lost and heavily addicted to drugs with no comprehension how to get out of the misery and the nightmare that I had been living for such a long time in my life. In 1989, I decided to go to a rehabilitation centre. I didn't go to this rehabilitation centre to rehabilitate myself. I went there to get out of prison. I was in Bogger Road in Brisbane. At this centre, I was being confronted every day on my attitude and my behaviour by residents in this centre. And they were telling me stuff like I was angry, I was threatening, I was intimidating, I was aggressive, I was a liar, I was manipulative, everything that I thought was normal in one's life. I didn't know any better. I thought all my destructive behaviours and attitudes that I had developed through being in institutions and using drugs and living an antisocial life were behaviours and attitudes that I needed to survive within. In other words, to live that lifestyle, a person has to survive in that lifestyle. They have to survive living in prison. They have to survive living on the streets taking drugs. I'm not saying it's right, but if you don't develop survival in your attitudes, in your behaviours, then you won't survive in those environments. And so the surviving mechanisms are being aggressive, lying, survival, saying whatever you have to say to get what you want, not thinking of anybody else other than yourself, thieving, stealing, dishonesty, and a lot more. So that's all I knew, and that's what I thought was normal, because I hadn't needed anything else to survive. So I couldn't comprehend what these people were alleging that I was in this rehabilitation centre. I just thought they were stiffs, they were imbeciles, they didn't have a clue, they hadn't done any jail, they were box heads, they were square heads, they were people that hadn't lived to my way of thinking. But these people had lived, they had just lived a different way. And deep down, somewhere beyond my survival skills in that lifestyle that I was living, I also wanted to live in some normality. But I didn't have the attitude, or I didn't have the identification that I had these self-defeating belief systems. I had these behaviours that I needed to survive in prisons or in boys' homes or being a drug addict. I didn't comprehend that I was living a life that didn't allow me to develop more trust, didn't allow me to let go of the survival mechanisms that is needed to live in prisons and being a drug addict. So, because I didn't understand how to reach that level of trust and not living in fear and not living in worry, not lying, manipulating, not trying to get what I want out of people, not being aggressive, because I didn't know anything else. I didn't know that I was the one that had created how I lived through an unconscious choice that I couldn't comprehend that I had made to survive in those environments. And I survived well in those environments. So when these residents in the rehabilitation centre kept confronting me every day on these behaviours and attitudes that I had created to survive, when they broke me down, like I describe it in my book like a brumby, like a horse. When they broke me down, I could feel vulnerable enough to start to see that I was part of the big problems that I had in my life. I was a major part of those problems. And when I realised that to live in a different space in life, I understood, after getting in touch with my feelings and crying and my emotions, I understood all the layers of fear and all the layers of survival that I placed upon myself to survive living in prisons and homes and being a drug addict. I understood that to get out of that lifestyle, I was going to have to change my behaviours, and I was going to have to change my attitude, because normal people couldn't handle that person that I was. Normal everyday people can't handle people that are threatening, that lie a lot, that intimidate people, that act in ways where they feel threatened by you physically. Normal people can't handle people that say one thing and do the other. Normal people can't handle people who deal with things through violence. Normal people can't handle people who accept that violence is a way of life. Normal people don't manage their life in that way. Normal people talk about things. Normal people manage things in a way where they don't feel threatened by other people, or they handle things differently. They manage their life not threatening other people by talking and by accepting things. And so I knew that for me to come out of that lifestyle, I had to start behaving in ways where it was completely foreign to me, where I'd want to react to people aggressively. I had to identify that within myself, and I've learned to talk to people where I wanted to get instant gratification and steal something. I learned not to steal. Where I wanted to manipulate people, I was aware not to do that to them. Where I wanted to get something out of somebody, I learned not to do that to people. Where I wanted, when I started to feel inadequate in talking to people, I had to behave in ways where I wasn't blaming people because I was feeling uncomfortable or feeling inadequate. I had to learn all these new skills to live away from taking drugs and being in prison. And I did it with practice and becoming very aware of who I was and my behaviours and my attitudes. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And people can change. One of the biggest lessons I learned through the transition on my change, and even after that, is not to blame people for the way I feel or for the way I think. I was taught that I was responsible for my thoughts and my behaviour. And it really gave me a lot of benefits in my life, because I stopped blaming everybody for things that didn't go right. I stopped blaming people for me not achieving things in life. I stopped blaming people for me being the person that I didn't like. I stopped blaming people for everything by taking that responsibility. And I think that was one of the major benefits that I grabbed onto at rehab. It was a great thing that I learned, and it was one of the most refreshing things. It was hard, because how else do I deal with my thoughts and my feelings if I'm not blaming people or I'm not interacting with others to blame people? How else do I deal with things? Well, I learned how to talk about my feelings and to identify my feelings. Instead of blaming people, I learned to say that I was frustrated. I learned to say that I was hurt. I learned to say that I didn't like myself. I learned to say that I behaved unacceptable. I learned to say that I was angry. I learned to say that I was responsible for my feelings and my thoughts. So it really worked psychologically to get out of that lifestyle I was living. But as I said, I don't think I could have emerged out of that lifestyle if I didn't have people around me that, number one, confronted me. And through that confrontation, that really helped me to see the person that I was. And if I didn't see that person who I was, I don't think I could have changed it, because my window of that person was normality. I didn't understand or comprehend anything other than that. But there is more than that. There is another life other than taking drugs. There is another life other than being in struggle town and living a life where you're at the mercy of everybody else and it's everybody else's fault why a life isn't lived fulfilled. I believe there is. And that's within us. Our life is ours. Our life is our responsibility. It's not anybody else's. When I hear people talk about people taking responsibility for themselves, it seems like people only take responsibility for themselves to a certain extent. But your thoughts and your behaviour, that's your responsibility too. And in that is your decisions. And in that is your actions. And in that is your choices. And in that is what you decide to do in your life. Every decision that a human being makes is their responsibility. Nobody is responsible for what you do or for what I do in my life. There's only one person that's responsible for that, and that's the person looking back at whoever that is in the mirror. Nobody else is responsible. And I really believe the more responsibility we can adapt to as human beings, the better our lives become. The more empowered we become in our choices, the more confident we become, the better decisions we make, the better choices that we make, the more aware we become. Because you've got to be when you take responsibility for yourself. There's no back door. There's no, oh, well, if that goes wrong, it's that person's fault. No, it's not. We make the decisions in everything. So you have to become more smarter. You've got to look at your choices. You've got to look at your actions. You've got to look at your behaviours. Because if you're making those choices in your life, you want to make decent ones. And if your life isn't going the way that you want your life to go, and if you're not looking, or if you're not decide you're not responsible for that, then you might struggle to find why you're making the choices and the actions that you do. There's a lot of power and responsibility for what we do in life. There's so much power in it. I believe it can scare people. The power in taking responsibility for what you do can be very scary, because it holds great weight, but it holds great responsibility also in one's life. And if we don't live a life of accountability in our choices, in our actions, and in our decisions, we're just going to be at the mercy of everything and everybody else in our life. And I've lived that life, and it's not a good way to live. It's really hard to accept your choices. It's hard to accept your actions. It's hard to accept your behaviour. But with work and with focus, you can make your life a little bit better by doing it. So that's the story I wanted to share about my experience of being unaware and spending a lot of time in prison, and how that transformation happened in my life. And a lot more stuff is in my book, All the W's King Hit book. I talk about all that stuff and more, and how I changed and how great my life has become. It's been hard, it's been difficult, but it's hard also too, blaming everybody for not living a good life. So take accountability, don't give up on yourself, and life is good with its challenges and with its struggles, which is all part of living a good life. You take care now and look after yourself.